Well, everywhere where we have seen new, bigger prisons be built, we've seen them filled, and we haven't seen an appreciable difference in crime rates. We haven't seen an appreciable difference in harms caused to people in community. In fact, what we see is a drain of resources, evisceration of the very supports and programs that might assist those individuals. In addition, in my previous life, when I was with Elizabeth Fry Society, I entered that organization as they had just finished what is still considered one of the best prison reform examples internationally. It was chaired by my predecessor at the time. It was more than half of the representatives on the Task Force on Federally Sentenced Women, as it was called, were community members. A number of prisoners and former prisoners were involved. There was an Aboriginal Women's Circle and a Vision Circle that was involved. And what they proposed was the closure of the prison for women and the building of not new jails, but centers within the community that would not resemble prisons, but were supposed to be integrated into the community so that only those women who, because of their sentences, could not go into the community would stay in the prison for programs and services. And if you've seen any of those prisons, initially they had virtually no programming space because that was what was supposed to happen, recognizing that the majority of the women were classified even by corrections as lower security, that they should be going into the community and accessing resources, and that the monies for programs and services should actually be injected into the communities so that women could be there, and their children were supposed to be with them so that they could actually have more of a seamless transition between going out of prison and into the community. Before the ground was even broken on all of those sites, security measures had already started to proliferate. And now if you visit any of those regional prisons for women in this country, yes, the minimum and medium security may look much nicer than what you would see, but they're very much, and men's prisons many of the new ones have been modeled similarly to adapt to this model of more individualized but communal living, so more of a housing setting and that sort of thing. But the reality is they're all prisons. They've all evolved to have the eye-in-the-sky cameras, the razor wire, the sensors, all of the static security measures of most prisons, and the dynamic security, which was supposed to be at the forefront of the models, has essentially evaporated. And dynamic security, as its name would denote, involves humane intervention. And in fact, most of the prisons, with the exception of the Healing Lodge, most of the prisons, as soon as they were opened, you started to see the division between, obviously, prisoner and staff. But the first time I visited the Okimauchi Healing Lodge on Nikanit Reserve, which is about 34 miles down a dirt road from Maple Creek, Saskatchewan, so equidistant from Calgary, Saskatoon, Regina, basically. The first time I visited, I can honestly say that I could not tell, aside from the women I knew from the prison for women or elsewhere, because there was a round dance happening that night. There were community members there were some of us from other places had been invited. There were staff members there, and there were women who were serving their prison sentences there. And I honestly that night could not have told you, aside from the women I knew, who was a prisoner, who was a community member, who was a staff. When I visited 2 months later, though, it had already started to change. And the last time I was there, just last year, again, it is a very nice prison, in terms of it's in a nice setting, it's on the Nikanit Reserve, it has lots of country around it, but it's still a prison. It has all of the other accoutrements, if you will, security features of a prison. And in fact, even though it's been a few years since they shifted it, women can't access those grounds without either being on an escort. They essentially have to get a pass, get conditional release to start to access the areas that when it first opened they had access to go picking medicines, to go do ceremonies, to do fasts, those sorts of things. They're now, even though it doesn't have a big razor wire fence around it, there certainly is security around it, and no maximum security women have ever been permitted to go there, even though it was built with the express purpose of taking, in particular, the Indigenous women who had been imprisoned at the prison for women. None of them got to go there. And even though they have what they euphemistically refer to as a safe lodge, which is that in that prison is the term for segregation, no maximum security women have ever been able to go there. And so even though it still looks better, many would say it feels better, it's nicer than many of the prisons, it's still a prison. And so in my experience, the ability to actually undo that, as seen by one of the best international examples in the world, happened right here in Canada with women in prison, would tell me that it's well nigh impossible to do. And I would say it's impossible to do, but I'll leave open the very possibility that what happened there for maybe 2 months maybe could be replicated, but it would be reliant on individuals standing up to and withstanding the pressure that comes on corrections to move back to a more traditional prison model. And I've yet to see any country withstand that pressure. Well, I mean, certainly my guess is everybody has the best of intentions. I mean, most people, including those who work in corrections, have the best of intentions of not, of trying to develop approaches that will not hinder or worsen or exacerbate the issues that people come into prison with, that they're actually trying to remedy that in some way. I think those good intentions, though, are for naught if we don't face fundamentally the structural inequalities that are part of our system. The fact that if you have a nice new prison, quote unquote, and you go in there and it's still full of the poorest, racialized, people with mental health and intellectual disabilities, then we're not fundamentally changing anything except making a bigger, nicer, at best, warehousing option. Instead, if we really want to address the issues of why more and more people are ending up in prison, whether it's on awaiting trial, as is the case at the Ottawa-Carleton Detention Centre and most other prisons, then what we should fundamentally be doing is looking at the social inequality, the racial inequality, the gender inequality, the ableist mentality that has led to the most marginalized, most victimized in our communities being the most likely to be criminalized and imprisoned. Because what we've seen with women is, even though most everybody would say when they walk out at night, they're not afraid of hordes of poor, racialized women with mental health issues, that's the fastest growing group that we're putting in prison. And so if we build a new prison that has more space and we don't develop the services in the community, guess where the police have the only option to go if they pick up someone because she's homeless or because she's having a anxiety attack on the corner or. And so the reality is the more we create those options, we suck the resources out of the community, human resources, financial resources, and I think we create an easy excuse to just continue to throw people away instead of really building the resources we need in the community for all of us to benefit, but especially those who are most on the margins. I mean, one of the challenges is, as I know from 35 years of working in community and with community non-governmental organizations, is the push in the moment is how do we remedy the injustice right in our face now of the person in segregation or the person who's about to be locked up. I just saw 5 guys to a cell in Iqaluit. Of course we want to. The human part of us wants to remedy that immediately. And I think we can remedy it very quickly if we say, right now, we can address this by developing resources in the community. We can link it to guaranteed livable incomes. We can link it to all kinds of other progressive policies, because the decision to build prisons is a policy decision. The decision to norm crime and punishment is a policy decision. We're all responsible for it. So every person in this community, not just the government and non-governmental organizations, need to take responsibility and say, is this the type of community we want, where we continue to build huge institutions to lock people away because we don't want to deal with the very real issues on the ground that are facing us because of whether it's lack of jobs, whether it's lack of income, whether it's the racial inequality, whether it's gender inequality. We need to fundamentally, as communities and as community groups and as organizations, refuse to be caught up in that and say, okay, sure, in the short term we'll agree to this prison being built. The minute you agree to the prison being built, you're already on a continuing on a trajectory, or if you're new in the area, new to the work, jumping onto a fast-moving train that is going to continue to suck those resources right out of the community. And so we need to be stalling that and stopping it and saying, you know, let's think about where we actually want to invest these resources. Because making a decision to build a prison sounds like an easy response. The amount of time, energy that's going to be involved in building a new prison would be far better invested in time, energy of building resources in the community.